I'm Gavin Clark with the National Museum of Computing and Reading Museum, and we are interviewing former employees and customers of Digital Equipment Corporation as part of the 60th anniversary of DEC opening its first offices in the UK. It's February the 5th, 2024, and we are online. And I'm here today talking to Dave Lawrence. Dave, let's start with the basics first of all. Please, if you could please give me your full name and your place and your year of birth.
My full name is David Franklin Lawrence, but that's because Franklin Roosevelt was famous at the time, and I was born 1936. What else did you want to know? I don't.
Tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up and your family. What do they do?
I grew up in uh, the northern end of the southern end of the Northern Line, like Morden, Surrey. So a famous place because it is the terminus of the Northern Line. I went to a local school. I passed the 11 plus and went to Rutledge, which at the time was quite an ancient grammar school. It was taken over, unfortunately, by the London Education Authority after I'd left. But a famous person who went there was one of the prime ministers. I can't remember which one. Anyway, it was a good school. I enjoyed it, and I did well there. And I don't know if this is interesting or not, but we were eligible for national service then, and my uncle, who was a merchant navy captain, said to my family, "Why don't you send the boy to sea?" So because they didn't know what to do with me, and he couldn't afford to go to university then, and so he paid for me to go to radio school to learn to be a Sparks, as we used to call it. In other words, a radio officer in the Merchant Navy. And that was my first sort of technical education that I got then. And I took to it like Dr. Water. I really, really enjoyed it. And I stayed there in the Merchant Navy till conscription ended in 1950, probably 1960, I think, something about then. And then I left the Merchant Navy because I'd got married. And then that was really the start of my career because I went to work for Mullards at Mitcham, who at the time were making magnetic cores for computer magnetic memories. And I was very suitable for that because of these were driven by valves then. You remember you know what valves were, Kevin?
So
Gavin, you
if
know
you
what?
tell us, so please tell us
Yeah,
what a valve is and what a magnetic core is.
yeah. So that was a brilliant education in technology because also my dad's paid for me to go and get an HNC at Wimbledon Tech, and I just enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and I learned also. I mean, if you test, I was testing I was responsible for testing the memory cores before they were assembled into memories, and it was very technical, very fundamental physics, right? And I enjoyed it. So
Well, did you have a
then comes the
scientific background growing up, or did you make things growing up? What's your kind of and what was your
oh
schooling
yeah,
experience?
sorry,
Were you technical?
yeah, I was always interested in technology. I loved. I had a Meccano, which I think all technically orientated boys had at the time, and trains were my main hobby really. So I had electric trains and things like that. And I learned. I think by the age of 15, I'd rewound my burnt out transformer for the trains. Right. So I was, always interested in those things. Um, but the going to radio school because it's half technology and half operating procedure was like confirmed my technology interest really, and learning about radio is very very interesting subject. So, I also went as well as that, I was sent on a radar course, which introduced me really to the concept of yes, pulses and pulse networks and all that sort of thing. So I was really ideally. So anyway, the funny thing about how I ended up joining digital was after I'd left the Merchant Navy, I think it was 2 weeks getting a job, and I went to work for Mallards, as I said, in South London. Mallards were a direct subsidiary of Philips, a giant company,
Okay.
an enormous company, and they were very, very sort of positive. As I say, they sent me on an HNC and paid for my time. And so then what we were doing at Mallards was, as I say, testing these things. But then a job came up to advertised by the Radio Corporation of America to work at Fylingdales. And Fylingdales were the proud owners of two 7090s.
So
And
slow
as
down. So
part
what
of
is Fidingdale? So what is Fidingdales, and what were the 7090s?
Okay, Fylingdales was the UK ballistic early BMUS, it was called ballistic missile early warning system on the Whitby Moors. There's pictures of it. There were huge sort of things just sitting on the moor with the aerials. The aerials were inside huge sort of circles,
These are the
circular
golf
things to keep
balls.
them protected. Yeah, golf balls. Yeah.
The huge
So
golf balls you'd see
there
on the
was
horizon.
yes. I don't think they're there anymore. They might be, but I don't know. So that was the site. The thing was run by the Radio Corporation of America. They employed me, but the site was run by the RAF. I was fortunate to be able to go on the course, the IBM 7090 courses, which were the biggest computers I think around in the world at the time, and that was sort of an excellent training. I I never actually worked on the computers not really, because they were only allowed 5 minutes downtime at any 1 minute. Okay. So they had two, of course, and interesting facts about them were they were so hungry for heat and power that they were cooled by by air conditioning run by truck engines. So, but anyway, as I say, it was actually
What were
boring.
they used for, the 7090s? What were you
Fun.
doing? What were the 7090s
Uh,
used for, and what were you doing?
oh, the 7090s were used for tracking the missiles if they ever found one. So they could see that. I mean, I don't know. They were sort of famous. The thing was programmed to look for missiles, right? It could also see the moon. So occasionally we got alarms from the moon and things like that. But I didn't like it there because it was boring. I wasn't learning anything. Once I'd learned it, there was no opportunity to work on the machine. Very little opportunity to work on the machine. So uh, you won't know this, but the technology job things were always in the Telegraph on a Thursday evening or
This is the
Thursday.
newspaper, yeah.
Yes, so we'd all sit around on night shift, not doing anything at all because it wasn't broken, looking at the jobs. And there was a fascinating job from Digital. Now, Digital was in Reading and I was in Whitby. And went home and said to my wife, "Hey, maybe we can move back to Reading." And she kissed me several times and said, "Great." So we then went to work for Digital in Reading. Now, at the time,
So back up for a little bit. So you saw the job ad. So you had to apply first of all for the job. What is the job ad you saw?
the job ad was, funnily enough, was for Uh, at the time, Digital made uh, magnetic memory testers as one of their products, as well as being computers, was magnetic memories. I think they sold a lot in the first 10 years or so. So I was ideally suited. I was one of the few people in the country, probably, that had much experience of core memories and all about them and how they worked and all that sort of thing. So I went for the interview. I was interviewed by Jeff Shingles, who's a famous name, and Ken Senior, who was actually the American in charge. And
Well, how was that? So you went to Reading. You've come down. How did you get down there? Did they pay for you to get down there? Was it a train down there? What was it?
no, no. Remember, it was a long time ago, really a long time ago. They paid a shilling a mile to go from Whitby to Reading. And a shilling a mile for 250 miles is quite a lot of money then. I mean, now it wouldn't even be worth getting out of bed for. So they were clearly the company to go for. I also went for an interview at the same time with Plessy in Northampton, but they didn't pay a shilling a mile. So when they offered me a job, I thought, no, I'll go with the rich company that's Digital. Being mercenary at the time.
So they made a good first impression on you then.
Pardon?
So they made a good first impression on you.
Oh yeah, I mean, did you ever meet Jeff?
No.
No, okay. Jeff was a great guy, but the American that was in charge of Europe, actually, from a maintenance point of view, I still correspond with. I'm in touch with him every week by email. A really nice, good guy, and he had the same background as me. He came out of the services with a technical background and joined Digital, but when Digital first started, so he'd got a 10-year start on me in terms of seniority. Okay,
so describe the job. So describe the job interview. So you went down to the office on Castle Street, I think. Was that correct? When it was still very small.
It was it was over a furniture store on the main junction in the middle of Reading. I don't remember the name of the street, to be honest, but it was a furniture shop, and that they were above it. Later on, by the time I joined, which was after training 6 months later on, they'd got proper premises farther out in Reading, which was better. And
so what was it like? Can you remember the office? Can you describe what it was like? Did it feel cramped or big, or was it airy and spacious? Did it feel like a technology company?
Okay, so what happened? Remember, I joined Digital, I think, in September, and immediately was sent to America for training, because unfortunately for me, although I was hired to be a memory tester engineer, the memory testers were run by their latest computer, which was a PDP-8, and PDP-8, as you probably know, became the thing that everybody wanted. So it was very good to be taught that as well as the memory tester, because about 6 months later, they decided to get out of the memory tester business because it wasn't making any money. And so I just moved over to work on PDP-8s and was quite good at that.
David, can you just describe to me, go back to the job interview? I'm interested to hear a lot more about the job interview and the office. So you went down to Reading and you met Jeff Shingles and Ken Senior. Can you remember much about the job interview or what they were like? And how did you feel going in there, being I don't know, like a young kid?
Well, first of all, they took me out to lunch, which was a good start. And they asked me technical questions, which I was quite good at answering then. I wouldn't be now, but I was then. And I just clicked with them. I mean, I got on. They were really nice people, like really nice, and I just got on really well with them. But they did ask proper technical questions. So I thought I'm pretty sure I got the job anyway, and so I was there. I drove back to Whitby, a shilling a mile, and was quite happy. When I got the job offer from Plessy, I didn't take it. But anyway, I can't explain it. I mean, all this was an office over over a furniture shop, and I can't remember anything about it other than, in fact, we went out to lunch, and most of the interviewing was done at a pub, which was right, but I can't remember the name of the pub now. But it was very, I don't know, it was very sort of suitable. I thought I enjoyed these people. They were both very technical. Ken was actually the field service manager for all of Europe for PDP sixes and tens. So he was pretty clever guy, and still is. So that was that. When I came back from training in the States, they'd moved premises to a proper small factory up the road, and that was they did a little bit of assembly there. So it was basically, it was basically just a place for the salespeople and for the field service people to be, but they did a little tiny bit of computer manufacturing as well. Did you ever
So
hear
tell
of
me about
special?
your.
Sorry.
Yeah, I did. Let me come on to that in a second. So tell me a little bit about. So they sent you for training in the States. Had you?
Yeah.
I presume that was at Maynard. Had you ever been to abroad or to the States before? By this point,
Yes. Yes. Because I was a merchant seaman for 8 years,
of course.
and had spent many a happy time in America on the eastern seaboard, and America then was a beautiful and wonderful place. I don't think it's quite the same anymore, but then you just made welcome everywhere you went. So as a merchant seaman, and that was the days when people would say, "Oh, gee, you speak really good English." They'd say to you, right? I'd say, "Yeah, that's because I'm English, you know." But I was that. So that was my first. That was 1955, I think. Yeah, probably when I first went to America, and it was a really nice place. Uh,
So they sent you
you
for
could get,
training, and what
yeah,
was that like? They sent you.
the training was good. It was proper classroom training. Sit down. Remember, I had to learn two things. I had to learn the PDP 8, which was a formalised course because they were supplying that to customers. So that was a proper course with with learning homework and all the rest of it. But then to learn the memory testers, I actually worked on the production line of the memory testers on final checkout of them, uh, and it was good. It was good practice, good training, and a very nice place to be. The only thing is, it's a bit hot in Massachusetts at the end of the summer, and Ken Olsen, the famous Ken, did not believe in air conditioning. So from a bloke from a temperate country like the UK, it was hot in the plant. It was in the mill at Maynard. So anyway,
So did they put you through your
interesting.
paces on that? You said you described it was it very much like a classroom setting that you had, and everyone was wearing suits and ties. What was the setup?
Well, sports suits pretty much. Yeah, jackets, sports jackets, and the rig for a field service guy was uh, sport a shirt and tie, but usually grey trousers and a sports jacket. That was the rig when you're out with customers. Only the IBM guys wore suits, as far as I know. Anyway, but uh, the training was good. I mean, it was given by there were people employed as specialist trainers. They weren't just anybody. It was good. So went from there straight back to Europe. Uh, yeah, straight back to Europe. There were several of us on the course. There was a future Scottish the man in Scotland, John Barrett, who's now still in charge of still there, and there's Ken Parker, who was the PDB6 guy on training, and one other person whose name I can't remember. And we were all together on the training, so we shared accommodation, shared cars, and things like that.
Where were you
The
staying? Were
company
you in
was,
hotels while you were there?
yeah, they put us in, not really hotels. They put us in what America's like. I can't remember what they called. They weren't full service hotels, right? But we'd
Motels?
go and eat. Yeah, motel, exactly. We'd go and eat in Howard Johnson's, which was down the road, and we were on a major road junction somewhere. But every two people had a car, courtesy of the digital. And my pal, I remember who the other person was, this guy called Chris Morris, who was called Mini Morris for obvious reasons. He was very small, and I shared a car with him, which meant he could go to sleep on the front seat while I was driving. He could stretch out on the front seat. So we had a good time. Obviously, we went to Niagara and all things that you could do, and we were getting paid $7 a day, I think, which, when you consider a three-course meal was $1, that was good money. You know, I think most of us didn't spend any money while we were there. We just spent the allowance. So anyway, I took to it like a duck takes to water. They were a beautiful company. They consulted with you. They didn't. There was no or very little strong discipline or anything. They just trusted you to, be an adult. So, it was good. So anyway, I came
So what
back. You
happened?
want me to talk?
So I was going to say, so you came
Go on.
back, and what was the job you did when you got back to the US, to the UK now?
When I came back to the UK, I was they were actually shipping their last memory tester that they ever made. They were shipping it to crap, to a well-known French company, and it was in France that we were installing it. Now they didn't leave me on my own to install it. They sent one of the guys who'd helped build it in the States over. I always remember him because his badge number was 007, of which he was very proud indeed. And we went to install this tester, and that was, I mean, you talk about the wheels falling off. The wheels really fell off. The salesperson who'd taken the order, had taken an order for things that were technically impossible. The the transistors that drove the tester were not capable then of what the customer wanted. You couldn't use, they were specific semiconductors, but they were just little baby things compared to what you can get today. And so we could not meet the specs on this thing, and the customer in the end rejected it. Now, at the time, the France was not happy with Americans at all. In fact, a couple of times the customs there confiscated not my toolkit, but my kit of parts, because I think they didn't like the Americans much. So worked on this thing, couldn't get it working. They hired a German engineer to come and help me, who, as far as I could tell, didn't understand Ohm's law. So he was bloody useless. And we took photographs of the performance of the machine and sent them back to the States. And the bad news thing was, in order to import into France, the company selling the thing had to put the money up, and you got it back when it was accepted, but it was never accepted. So Digital got both the machine and the machine back and no money. And then Ken decided he didn't need that business anymore. So I simply moved over to Men PDP8s instead, which was, I say, lucky that I'd done the PDP8 course from my point of view. That was
So what
that.
was your role
But
on PDP-8? So you were an engineer, or what was your specific job title?
well, um, I was I was quite successful early on. There'd been one PDP-8 at Harwell, which nobody could mend, and I just happened to walk by it when it failed, and I noticed what had caused it to fail, which was more luck than good judgment. And I sort of repeated the thing that caused it, and it did it again. They'd been looking for the problem for months, including the guys at Harwell, who were pretty smart guys as well.
Mm.
So my sort of claim to fame was then, and then I got the job basically of support engineer across Europe for PDP-8s, which was
That's
not
cool. That's a
great.
huge
It was,
role. That's a huge role, isn't it? How big was DEC by this point for you to have landed such a role, or how much? How big was
uh,
it?
in the UK, the when I joined them, they were taking £1 million. I think in year two, it was like £4 or £5 million. That was the size of the business. But business was booming in Germany, in France, Italy as well, probably, and Scandinavia.
Mm.
So in the end, after a while, I became a support engineer for basically for Scandinavia as well, and travelled a lot, travelled a hell of a lot. Never stopped travelling actually, and but it was all right. So I was never out of
Was it
aeroplanes.
just was it just you? Did you were you a director of field support, or were you
No,
lower
no.
rank? How
The
come you?
higher ranking was there was a field service manager in the UK and a one in Europe. Right? Cannot, no, my friend Ken Senior was the guy in Europe. He wasn't my friend then, but he's since become my friend.
Mm.
And the guy in the UK, this is I don't know if I should say this, but he was fired because he broke the law in America by failing to tell them of a prison record that he had.
Mm.
And the customs, the immigration people found out about him and kicked him out. So he got the sack. And then they hired another guy who was really a good guy that I worked for. As he was the field service manager in the UK, but he wasn't particularly technical actually. Um, but basically, I was all the time I was in digital working as opposed to managing. They, I was always like the support guy. I was always going somewhere doing something. Uh,
Mm.
the worst thing about it was France was very poorly served by its field service guys, and
Mm.
I used to have to go to France a lot, which didn't please me particularly because
Mm.
I was married and kids were coming along and that sort of thing. So, but anyway,
So
so that
a lot of
what
travel. So you
what
were
else?
a field service engineer by this point. You're doing a lot of
Yes,
travel.
yeah, I
How come
travelled
you
continuously.
didn't? How come you were getting called out? I suppose to these European countries. Did they not have field service engineers or managers there that could have done the job, or did you work with them?
They did. The German guy I remember particularly well, but the French they just weren't any good at it. All that's all I can say. I'd arrive there on a Monday morning, and because it's not far to France, as you know, and they'd still all be in the office. They weren't out mending things, and I'd say, come on then, let's go and do something. So, but Dave, you don't understand the traffic on the periphery, all this, and we don't usually go out of here till 11. By the time you get out there, 11's too late to start work. Really. Anyway, so it was like that all the time. But I shouldn't,
Mm.
I was glad to not do that anymore. I was glad when I became more associated with Scandinavia and Germany because they are proper people.
So
Sorry,
tell me
shouldn't say
about
that.
so tell me about the the progression up. So then you during this time, I think you said you spent 11 years in Reading, based in Reading, I presume. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes. I, I was the support engineer for PDP-8s and bits of things, drums and things like that. They sold drums then. I don't know if you've ever seen a drum.
Mm.
Have you ever heard of a drum?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they were interesting things to mend. So I actually went on a proper drum course. But so eventually they decided to open branches in the UK. So I had the opportunity to stay doing what I was doing, or I was probably the senior support engineer, or be a field service branch manager. So the first field service office opened was in Ealing, so which was just about commutable from me from where I lived. So I took the position of field service branch manager in London, or for London, and so that sort of started me on the path of being a manager rather than being a technician. Although I still used to get called on for drums and things that I'd specialised in, and displays, which were, I don't know if you knew, but the displays Digital made then were
Mm.
scientifically correct. You could use them for scientific measurements. They're not
Mm.
now. Well, it's different, but so all the drivers were, you know, proper parametric amplifiers and things like that. It was fascinating subjects. But anyway, one of the problems as in industry I found was that if you were good at something, you ended up managing other people, which
Mm.
I didn't mind, and I was probably quite okay at it. But I actually like to hand my hands on things really. So, but you couldn't have both. You couldn't have it both ways.
So
So
you become a field service officer, so that you moved to manage the field service office in Ealing, but then you over a period of time you then move up and on, don't you? You find yourself in Scotland, don't you? What
what
was it? Because you
happened?
became
What
managing director
happened?
of Scotland, didn't you?
What happened was that um, at the time Scotland were attracted. Like IBM was in Scotland, HP was in Scotland, not the HP we know today, but HP
Mm.
Instruments, and so Digital decided to open a, a factory in Scotland. So it was opened by an American, but they decided they wanted a British person to do it. So I was like just the natural person to get. I mean, it wasn't a big deal of an interview, and I just got the job. And
You said, didn't you say Jeff Shingles put your name forward?
he probably did, yeah. I mean, I don't know. He never told me, but
Mm. Okay.
I was interviewed by various manufacturing managers and things like that. And but it was there weren't technical interviews. They were just, you know, are you a suitable person type of interview.
Mm.
And so I never really had any manufacturing training, which was a shame
Why?
because
Why do you think they wanted somebody sort of local rather than an American person running the factory in Scotland? Did that ever come across in the conversations you had before, or during, or after?
I think it was probably, I don't really know, but it was probably Ken Olsen who thought that you should have, you know, if you're in a country, you should use the people that live and work there that come from that country. Because in Germany, the German field service manager and the German sales manager were all German, and in every country in Europe, they became, you know, the local people were the managers. My friend Ken Senior had gone back to America by then, long time ago. So, I mean, the job in Scotland, it started off with a small factory. all built by the SDA, the Scottish Development Authority, and then it turned into a huge factory of about. I think we employed about 3,000 people by the time I left, or maybe more. I can't remember now. But in that job, I was also responsible. It was what they called a final assembly and test plant. So all the equipment that was actually made, the module racks and all that, were all came to air and were assembled there, checked out, and shipped to the customers. And I think they also felt that the UK was the second best country customer in the world. I think they also felt that they should have a factory in the UK. We, by the time it all went wrong, we were shipping 10% of all the volume was shipped from was bought in the UK and shipped. The finished volume was shipped from Ayr or Galway sometimes, but so anyway,
That's
that meant that I became responsible for final assembly and test in Ayr and in Galway, and then later on, I picked up responsibility for other factories, the German one, the French one, and I mean, it was a nominal responsibility, really. I mean, I got the blame if they didn't make their budget, but I was sort of typical of a big company, really. You didn't sort of, yeah, go on. You didn't have to do anything
I was going to say,
technical.
how big were the operations? Because you said Air grew up to about 3,000 people, and you mentioned Galway, Germany, and France. How big were those in terms of people? How big were they by their peak?
Galway was probably the biggest because it was tax haven, right? Um, in in Ireland, there was Galway that made both did uh, proper builds, but they built from scratch. They had module lines, and they did final assembly and test. And also, they had a software site where software was basically printed and developed and packed because that was a selling. We sold a lot of software separately. And then in Clonmel, which is south of Galway, there was another factory in Ireland as well. Um, the reason for them being there was that it was tax. Tax, as you know, is a tax haven. Ireland's a tax haven, or was then in particular. So, but I ended up sort of being responsible for the final assembly and test bits and the software bits there. And then when we had factories in Germany, uh, they made discs. I was not responsible for the discs because that was a separate technology, very much so. We also opened a factory. I don't know if you knew in Queensferry. Did you know about that?
Yeah, I've heard of Queensferry. Yeah.
Yeah, only it was a disaster. We thought we could make chips, and you there's no way.
What went
We never did. We
what
never
went
got
wrong
it
at
right.
what went wrong at Queen? Were you responsible for Queensferry at all, or what
No,
went
I
wrong
was
there?
not. Thank goodness. I was responsible in as much as it was in my territory. So I was responsible that we played nicely with the UK government and we liaised and did all that. And I helped choose the site and negotiate a huge amount of money we paid the laird for the land. But uh, we they shipped people over to start it to run it. And I mean, it cost $1 billion the plant because it was clean rooms, umpteen clean rooms, and they never did. I don't think produce any saleable chips, or not really anyway. So that was the start of the downfall. Really, spent too much
Okay.
money, and it was a
Let's go
tragedy,
back.
really.
It was just circle back just briefly, just get. I'm trying to get an idea of scale. So you mentioned there was up to 3,000 people in there, and you mentioned there was separate operations. There was Galway, and there's somewhere else you mentioned, but which was hardware, one was software.
Clonmel,
You, and then
Clonmel.
you mentioned Clemel, and you mentioned Germany. Roughly, just give me an idea of headcount. How, in terms of thousands or hundreds of people, can you remember how big each of those was? Just trying to get an idea of how many people
Well,
you were
we're now
supposedly
talking
responsible for.
about we're talking about manufacturing, right? Not field
Mm.
service. Each of these
Yes.
places
Yeah.
had their field service operations as well.
Yeah.
But in manufacturing, in Germany, there was about 500 people making discs.
Mm.
In France, there was about, I don't know, four or 500 theoretically making terminals, but I'm not sure we made too many terminals.
Mm.
Um, Ireland and the UK were by far the biggest because when it just the amount of square foot, the
Mm.
factory in Scotland was nearly 300,000 square feet, and I think it was probably bigger in Galway. Clonmel was a smaller factory, but it also made products there. Uh,
And
I
what was the
I got
headcount in Ireland? Do you remember?
fun, fun
Do you remember the
headcount in
headcount in
Ireland.
Ireland at all? Yeah.
Yeah, I probably do if I think about it. It's hard, it's hard to say because
Mm.
it grew. As you know, everything about digital grew like a bloody mushroom. So at one time you think you knew, and then there was probably 3 or 4 thousand people in Galway. But then if you added up the other bits and pieces, like the software plant and the other things like that, they had a few other things tacked on. It was probably
Mm.
5,000 or something like that. And
And
yeah, go on.
what was it like? Was it like an exciting time? Because obviously, as you said, it grew like a mushroom. How was your job role changing at this time? How are you finding it? Because it's a completely different. You're finding yourself a completely different role to what you had been, hadn't you?
I ended up spending almost all my time in aeroplanes. And because if I wasn't going to visit the European responsibilities, I was going to America, which, I didn't like going to America. When I was in Europe, I was very much my own boss. Remember, there wasn't mobile phones. Once you're on an aeroplane, you're out to touch. Brilliant. I wouldn't like it now with, mobile phone in wherever you go. So I used to visit America about 4 times, 5 times a year. And I went on European tours like almost continuously from every week. Uh, my boss then was in Geneva. Because by this time they'd started a whole European hub based in Geneva. So it had a full set of people. It had, a full set of finance guys, a full set of field service managers, and things like that. So the field service manager of Europe resided in Geneva. Is that right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. They get mixed up
So,
because now it's Zurich, but anyway.
so
So,
tell me, you
but
you you mentioned also that you had you said when we chatted earlier you were fortunate enough to have met Ken Olsen. So tell me a little bit about that. So you described him as a genuine, nice, and scary man. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
yeah, I probably of all the people in Europe, I met him more than anybody except Jeff Shingles. What happened was uh, the very first time I met him, he'd there was a customer with a Link 8. Did you ever hear of Link 8s? They're
Don't
a
think so.
special
No.
version of PDP-8, scientific version. And it was, I think the customer was probably in a university somewhere, and he'd complained to Ken direct that this wasn't working. I didn't know anything about it. It hadn't come to me, hadn't come through the normal field service channels. So Ken had sent the designer of the Link 8 over. So I was in the Reading office one day, one night. I mean, I'd only been joined about 2 years. And the phone rang and it was Ken. So you pick the phone up and this voice says, "Oh, hello, who's that?" I said, "Dave Lawrence." He said, "There's Ken Olsen here." So, what do you do? You immediately panic. And, but he said who he was looking for and had I seen him and could I find him. And so I found the guy and told him to ring Ken. But that was the first time I met Ken. But then Jeff went to, Jeff went, I think, for 3 months work in the States. I just supposed to get used to the States. And in that time, Ken came on a big visit to Europe. So I sort of hosted him round Europe, really. I put him on aeroplanes and sat with him and held his hand and all that. But he was an amazing guy. He was huge. He was a very big man, and his brain was like his body. There was nothing you could talk to him about that he didn't know more about than you. Not that he wasn't overbearing or anything, but if any subject you talk about, so like trains, I knew a bit about trains. He knew a lot about trains, right? But he was really a nice guy, and I got on really well with him. And so then, as time went on, it just so happened that I often met him, or he came to Ayr several times. He had a board meeting in Ayr once. A whole board, the main board, came. No, that was a bit of a scary occasion when that happened.
Why is that
We
scary?
Well, there's all the whole lot of them. The big wheels, the owners, the actual owners like General Dorio and all those people actually appeared in Ayr. Luckily, there were quite posh places to accommodate them on in Ayr. But remember one bit, the 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 chief counsel for the company was Ed Schwartz, and Ed was one of these lawyers that was into everything, and everybody was sort of a bit scared of him. And he, the plane came, right, and they were all on it, and Ed Schwartz had a trolley, for his stuff, and it was on the pavement outside Prestwick Airport, and he hit somebody's car with his trolley, and a little aggressive Scotsman, and this guy went berserk, and so talking to at the time, the head of one of the world's major companies, or the lawyer, and Ed just didn't know what to do. I mean, when a Scotsman gets angry, he gets angry. It was just so funny, and I'm trying to be the good shepherd and calm everybody down and all the rest of it. So, but there was just lots of times I met Ken, and it was always more accidental than sort of planned. But I always got on all right with him. One embarrassing time was his wife, who's Finnish. I can't remember her name now. I think it was Lecky or something like that. I met them off the plane. I think they came into Glasgow, so I had to drive them in the evening from Glasgow to Ayr, which is about 40 miles. Well, where they were staying, it was 40 miles. And she started talking. She said, "Oh yes," she said, "I've got this photograph of Robert Burns." So that doesn't seem right somehow. So there's the boss's wife saying that she's got a photograph of Robert Burns. Well, I don't think there are any photographs of Robert Burns. So, but it's interesting because afterwards, Ken said, "You handled that all right." He said, "She just doesn't know there's no photographs of Robert Burns." But it was very awkward, because she was quite a demanding woman. She wasn't, quiet. She was, I suppose, if you're the wife of somebody like Ken, you're going to be a bit something. Anyway, that was just an anecdote. So
So you're in there big. You're kind of mixing with very senior management of a large international, well, the world's second largest computer company by this point, aren't you? Do you have any sense of that? I mean, it sounds like you're very easygoing. and the relationships were all kind of fairly relaxed, even though obviously it was all business. But did you ever catch yourself and think, here I am in a senior position with the senior management of this large, world's second largest computer company?
Well, it was sort of right. If you went to America, it was split in. There was the sales office, the field offices, the field operations, manufacturing, and engineering. The big people were engineers. The really top men were engineers, and they were all nice people. Don't get me wrong, but the sort of hierarchy of the place was, if you went there, the people who really ran it were one of those three hierarchies, right? And so, if you wanted to get anything special done, you had to go. You had to arrange a meeting. Probably, particularly if you wanted to introduce a new product to air, you had to go and get the engineer. The engineering manager owned its permission, or why it was a good thing to bring it to. Why did you want to do that? Or what benefits was his product going to have? So, yeah, you always had to meet with these people. But what there was every quite often, every month, in fact, there was a managers meeting run by Ken. If you wanted to make any major proposals, you had to take your proposal to that management meeting, which was scary, believe me, because the people there were often, directors as well as employees, and they didn't care what they said. They'd say anything really. So you just had to be very careful what you said and how you said it, and that you were well prepared. When I was lucky, I think, because I always felt when I was at that meeting, I was a little bit protected by Ken. He'd maybe divert things away from me, but so I did meet an awful lot of the senior managers, like really met them. But as you
So
know,
it was
America,
a sort of scary experience. So did you put ideas forward at these meetings?
yeah, it was scary. It was really scary, actually. I mean, I think everybody who ever went to them panicked a bit because there was the whole top hierarchy was there, and they weren't afraid of anything because they're all multimillionaires anyway. Particularly the directors, as you know, they were. I don't know how much money. They were the people who actually owned it. The people that had, you know, lent Ken the money to start it. You know that story, do you? About
Mm,
he borrowed
mm,
a lot of money. I think really a lot of money,
mm,
which was a shame because it was never his company really.
mm.
It was only his company in as much as he was a technical genius. So nobody could really beat him on the technology. But then when he left, the company just went, and that was the end
Yeah.
of it.
You're interested. You mentioned the engineer, the sort of the power relationships, and it was an engineers company. You obviously had a very technical engineering background. How did you think um, did that change? Did that make
Oh,
DEC different in any way to other companies? Obviously, you spent a large part of your career there. From what you see, do you see DEC was tangibly different as a computer company, a technology company compared
yeah,
to others because
yes,
it had this engineering culture?
yes, very different. The American engineers didn't think anybody else was an engineer. I mean, they would just took no notice of anybody. And I mean, I'm talking about actual people who design CPUs and things like that. They took no notice of anybody. We right towards the end, and I was put in charge of it, and I could do nothing with it. They bought. Oh, excuse me. I'm be with you in a minute, Jane. Um, they Have you heard of Piercarlo Fallotti?
Yeah.
He was the final European manager, and he was also Italian. And to my mind, he was a wheeler dealer, and he actually got prosecuted in the end for wheeler dealing with the shares.
Mm.
But he somehow bought a company. I thought a company called, I think it was Man or Mannheim, a major German electrical engineering company, and tried to join it to digital. So
Mm.
I was responsible for the integration, and it was totally beyond me to, because he had never got the buy-in of digital engineers back in the States, and they these Germans, we don't know, very this is a fact I shouldn't really say, but very arrogant. Some people, you know, very biased race
So
wise.
you had to have the engineering buy-in. Nothing could happen unless the engineers were bought into
No,
an idea. It
exactly.
sounds like.
As far as I was concerned, I just didn't exist. And the German company we were trying to buy, they just couldn't understand it because they were very organised. There's a rule for everything and this and that. And they'd say to me, "Well, where do we go? What are we going to do next, Dave?" Saying, "Well, I'll try and get somebody over to see you," but without basically what needed to happen was the German products needed to be adopted by a product line engineer in America,
Mm.
and it never, as far as I know, it never happened to this day.
Mm.
And I think the company it was a good company. I think they pay. I don't know because the whole thing collapsed then pretty much.
It
But
was interesting. But how? I mean, you were in the thick of it. How far was this engineering culture a kind of I suppose, a help or a hindrance to DEC's? Obviously, it's no longer with us anymore. But was it a good thing to have this very engineering-led culture, and this what was called the matrix style of management, or was it slightly more chaotic? And did it make things difficult? Do you think?
it was. It did make things difficult, yeah, because it was. The theory was, came from Harvard, right? The matrix management. And matrix management is okay if the people in the matrix want to be in the matrix management. But the more powerful and richer and everything gets, they're just going to do their own thing anyway. So then I was always lucky because I wasn't really one of them. I could sort of a little bit work because I was British and most Americans like Brits, right? And I could they'd always talk to me. They'd even explain why they couldn't do what I wanted them to do and things like that. So I was really quite lucky like that.
Do you think? Just curious to find out how far you think Ken Olsen himself personally shaped the culture. He's obviously a larger than life person, and he was very present. He sounds like he knew a lot. Do you think that this we hear a lot about this culture of doing the right thing? I don't know if you came across that doing the right thing, and the DEC way, doing the right thing by the customer or by the employee. Did you ever experience this kind of concept of the culture, do the right thing by the customer,
Yes,
or the DEC way?
very much.
How
Uh,
would you quantify it? How would you describe it? How did you experience it?
well, unfortunately, that was the debt way for the first 10 or 15 years. But as it got bigger and bigger, and everybody got wealthier and wealthier on the shares, it turned much more uh, financially managed, right? And that was sort of begun. At one time, Ken had always said, if you have to fire somebody, it's your fault. You shouldn't have hired him in the first place. He meant if you were firing somebody because it you didn't need them. In other words, the
Mm.
company didn't need those 10 people or something. And he used to get very upset with you if you were a manager who had to fire people. Now that sort of stopped by about probably 1985 or something. So all his principles were correct and were led to it being such a popular and well-known company. And I was always very friendly with the sort of HR people who had an awful lot of influence on the company. You know, that to try new methods of management, new methods of employee management, and all that. In fact, still one of my best friends is with a PhD in HR. She came to AIR. She preferred it. She still lives. She wanted to go home, but she came and she introduced whole management systems to AIR, whereby people were sort of responsible for what they did. That was really what Ken's philosophy was. You are responsible for what you do. I mean, I thought it was marvellous because, you know, Mullard, by the way, Mullard was all right too because I know we're not talking about Mullard, but they were well managed as well. So
What
I don't know
did it
what else
mean?
to say.
What did it mean? I've heard this before. You had to take responsibility. You weren't necessarily told what to do, but when you were
You're
given
very
freedom to do
rarely,
what you wanted to.
yeah, you're rarely told what to do. Not if you're senior manager. I mean, like it was up to me to decide on the customer relationships that the air plant had with Digital's UK customers. You know, we built proper facilities to wine and dine customers and things like that. Customers were always anxious to come to a plant. Actually, really liked coming to a plant. The only problem was some of them knew more about it than I did. So that was embarrassing. You know, if you understand what I mean. Because I wasn't really a professional manufacturing manager. I was a professional technician. But some guys had come along and owned a huge factory, you know, like, I don't know, a car factory. I thought it was a bit strange because it was free and easy, you know. But anyway, we went down the tubes, I
You
guess.
described. It's interesting you say one of our questions in the survey was DEC was famous for having a very kind of progressive and supportive working environment and culture, and also engaged in engaged with the local community. I think you pointed to that as well in your survey. You said if you could elaborate a little bit about how you were involved in, I think, and
A lot.
helping people get on in the company. Tell me a little bit about that. How would you help people get on in the company?
How would it help people get on in the company? Or
You said you would recommend people, you'd put people forward for positions and things like this. Is this kind of like, I think, the way of helping people spotting talent and helping it move forward through the company?
well, I would sort of do that anyway, as that's part of the job. But I thought my sort of major interface was often with local people. For instance, like we were able to really help the local community with gifts of computers and all that sort of thing, and help them with jobs if they were, you know, if you go to a technical school and they'd recommend, you know, two or three pupils for a technician's job, we would try and oblige. But my biggest thing with the public was there was a man called Professor Newell at Dundee University, and he was unique in as much as his whole life was searching for applications for computers for the disabled. And he was famous for it. And he'd got Queen's Medal for it and things like that. But I became very, very friendly with him. And we had some products that nobody ever bought, which were able to translate like my voice into a Glaswegian voice or into a friendly Pally voice or whatever. So that was ideal for disabled people, perhaps if they couldn't talk. And so, when possible, if I had a glut of these sorts of interfaces, I'd give them to him and he'd work. I mean, it wasn't that I was cheating the company. I'd have to write them off and go through the procedures. But I, I would, I helped him, and he was just a really nice guy. And the, he Dundee University was very famous at the time for this, for helping the disabled. And I think he, the Queen Mother, knew all about him, and she opened a wing for him of the university, and I got invited to that simply because I'd helped him. So, but there are a lot of instances like that where I'd get I'd get to know people in universities, and I was on the board of Paisley University, and I was partly on the board of Dundee, although in a different way. But that was sort of thing. My That was my effort in making digital, uh, useful to the community. Really, I enjoyed doing that. I think I was quite good at it. But
Did the,
remember,
I
I
guess
was allowed to do it. Nobody would have stopped me doing that. It was there was no discipline that said I couldn't do it, even though probably meant spending overall quite a lot of money. So, but it was
was it
that
part
was
of the
what
company's culture to encourage that kind of activity?
yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly, I was always, at management meetings, I'd sort of say what we'd done and this, and I always got sort of patted on the back for it and things like that. So I felt I was doing okay.
So this was cool.
So
Okay, what do you think is the so moving ahead a little bit? Obviously, things come to an end. DEC's done very well. I believe you took voluntary redundancy, didn't you, at some point in mid 80s? Was that correct?
so again, so I missed everything you said then.
Sorry, I was just pulling up my notes. So we're just discussing sort of the kind of the winding down of DEC, as it were. So you kind of were there until the end, I think, weren't you?
Yeah,
How had the
sadly,
company changed? How was the company changing? Because you've seen it through the glory years, this massive growth. You've travelled extensively. You've met senior management. How's it changing by the 1980s and by the time you're sort
no,
of
it
at the peak of the career?
didn't change until the 1990s. 1980, end of 1980s, things were getting a bit tight. Money wasn't flowing so much, but it was well into the 1990s before it really changed, and that's when we used to travel business class. Then they put the restriction that you couldn't travel business class unless British Airways gave you an upgrade. But at the end, right at the end, I don't know. Without being really rude about people, I can't really. I don't want to be rude about anybody. The man, manager,
what was the change you saw happening? How would you compare the sort of 90s to what you'd seen for the rest of your long career with
well,
DEC? What was
a
the
guy called,
sense? What was happening?
right. I'll tell you. The guy who took over was a guy called Palmer, right? And Palmer, prior to being hired by Digital, God knows why they hired him, because he'd failed in a major semiconductor company before. And I remember being in the air plant, and an Irish guy. We had a lot of interaction with the Irish guys. Irish guy came over and he said, "Who's that?" I said, "That's the new boss. That's Bob Palmer." He says, "No, really?" He said, "That bastard. He never paid the wages in the last company I was on. He collapsed. The company died, but the wages were left unpaid." And apparently Palmer was like really in trouble with the Irish government over it. But he was that sort of a bloke. I, I the first sort of meeting he came to in Air, we try and be polite and introduce him to everybody. And Pat, the personnel manager, PhD and all, she was just trying to make conversation. So she said something to him like, Bob, she said, so what sort of things do you do to relax? He said, I date women, just like that. It was just horrible. He was one of those people that, if he was dying in the gutter, you would have left him there. It was just really nasty. And that's when, to my mind, the whole thing I think because to some extent the company had run on goodwill, an awful lot of people's jobs were not really defined. They just did them. And as soon as you tried to discipline them, people stopped doing that and didn't, they would just do what they were supposed to do and no more. But it was a funny time. I was really glad, really, really glad to get out. And it's really strange because this is just the person that had hired me into manufacturing was a guy whose photographs around somewhere. And he, by over many moons, had finally become the manufacturing manager. When this guy Palmer ended up replacing the god of manufacturing, who had been appointed by Ken Olsen in year zero, that guy went and he put my friend into the job, and he was my friend, my really good friend. In fact, I went to see him when he was dying, and I lost what I was going to say. He was that man was responsible for digital's downfall tomorrow. He didn't know anything about anything. He was responsible for the semiconductors, and he built this plant for $1 billion in, and he didn't run it properly, or he couldn't, or whatever. But I think if you ever really go and ask anybody, most people will have forgotten by now, but anybody still around like me and say what really happened at the end, it was that man. Ken left, and there was nobody.
How did you notice the changes? How did you notice the changes, Dave? I mean, obviously there were some subsequent layoffs. How did it kind of affect the quality, I suppose, of the atmosphere inside DEC, or did you notice the atmosphere, the culture was changing by this point?
People became frightened of their jobs because he must have sacked probably at least 20 people, like 20 senior managers, and replaced them with other ones just out of the blue. In fact, one of the people that was a replacee, I knew him quite well, and he just wasn't the right person to and he didn't last long anyway. But he was hiring people at $1 million in the UK. He was paying people $1 million. I can't complain. I was well paid, but not $1 million, obviously. But it was just chaos. It was utter chaos, and it's such a shame that Ken couldn't go on forever. And if in a way, it was Ken's fault because he never had a successor. He didn't. He just didn't. He maybe had a few he thought were successors, but they left or they got too rich on the stock, because you know the story of the stock. And you're all stock millionaires. All the people that started the company were millionaires.
So tell me, so just go back. So you left it, I think, DEC in 1994. Was that correct? 95.
95, I think.
95. What was circumstances? How come? What was the final thing that made you leave the company?
They offered me redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
They just said, it was my. By this time, my friend was in charge of manufacturing, right? And so it was him. And he said, Dave, he said, the pressure's coming on. He said, we can't really, we don't need the managers we've got in Europe anymore. And he says, so I think it's time you went. But he did the redundancy package, which was outstanding. And not only that, he made sure that a pension was commensurate, with it. And then, the funny thing was, in the world of human beings, he would hear nothing wrong against Palmer, but a few weeks later, Palmer fired him. And he couldn't believe it, my friend. He just couldn't believe that anybody would have that level of duplicity or nastiness in him, because he'd supported him, you know. So anyway, that was my buddy, and
Okay.
unfortunately, he ended up with pancreatic cancer, which you can't
So
survive.
what was your friend's name? Can you recall your friend's name? What was his name, Dave? Do you remember?
Unfortunately, although he was really a best friend, I cannot remember his name. I've got a picture of him out there, and I can't believe that. It's like not being able to remember your wife's name or something. But he was a really. Oh, seriously. As I get older, this happens to me. I can't always remember things, so I'm sorry.
That's no problem. Well, tell me, just reflecting back then, we're coming sort of to the end here. Just tell me a little bit about what you think then is, I suppose the big question is, what is DEC's no longer with us? What is DEC's legacy? What has it left us, if anything, to the world in general, to computing, would you say, or to the computing in the UK?
Uh, I don't know. I think all I can say is that it would have left people that used to work for digital will will try. I'm almost sure would try, if they were managing or in the right, would try and create a similar atmosphere to the early days of digital, where do what you think's best. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. Just all those normal sort of nice things that people say. But I don't know the very few people uh, that I know have moved into other jobs. They're all gone now. None of my contemporaries are alive, actually. Sadly,
What would you
which is
describe? What would you describe as your most then? If you to make it a little personal, what would you say? What would you describe as your most abiding memory of having worked for DEC?
um, probably to some extent to work with universities, to be treated by heads of universities as somebody that had something to offer them or something like that. And I'm so proud to have worked. I was proud to have worked for DEC. I mean, there's no doubt. Everybody before the very end was proud to say I worked for DEC, you know, but it did collapse really badly and nastily. And
Where do you think
just
that
because
pride
of it.
came from?
Well, because you were trusted. Everybody was trusted. I mean, I remember one of the cleaners in air, the sort of thing you could do, and we did. He was really a good guy, nice Scotsman, quite old, and we sent him to America to see how they did cleaning in America, which was just an excuse. But that's the sort of thing you could do, and that probably cost the company £1,000 or something. But you were encouraged to make gestures like that or do things like that. And I mean, the fundamental thing is treat people how you would like to be treated. Do as, it's a Lord's Prayer, do as you would be done to. And that is how I think I managed. as low as I could, and how the company managed. And it was always a disappointment when it wasn't, and it never really let me down until the last 6 months or so. And then you're just glad to get out with your skin, without any bad thing happening, sort of thing.